climax plus resolution of the novel, so people get some payoff, and you also get like a good wholesome Christian plot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could exist, Zach. Now, I would be pleased as punch if you could come back with a theological argument against what I'm describing.
Okay, so
And I'm not saying you have to do it today. You can go do your homework and come back with a theological argument against it. I'm just saying, because in my mind, the intent is to strengthen the union between the couple. That's the intent of the stories, right?
Okay, but when you say erotica, though, you gotta define terms. Is this going to be anything? Because I mean, of course, a story that talks about, like what Regina described, as long as it's not like blatantly, getting into it and showing everything, I don't think it would necessarily be bad. But when you use the word erotica, I don't think there's any way you could really get around it. Like even if they are married, it's still just, people.
That's what I'm asking is maybe what if it was designed specifically to be used as a marital aid, essentially. Like,
right.
Like kind of you actually did bring up a good point with the Song of Solomon, which I personally read it as kind of a metaphor for the union between the soul and the body, or, God and the soul, depending on how exactly you're reading it. But I think, at the same time, the sensuality of the verse, to me, it's also kind of a form of like very early kind of sacred sex practice, basically, and the only form of it that I could possibly find in my research in the Western world, really. So I think it's also kind of in that way designed a little bit as a marital aid for a couple, and that's, a Bible book. So I don't know. I don't see anything wrong with it personally from just a theological perspective, but I too would be interested if you could find something for or against that.
Yeah, I mean, I would still just go back to the law, though, and pretty much all sensuality was looked down upon, and I mean, punishable. I believe, that doesn't. I mean, the punishable part, obviously goes away with the removal of the ceremonial aspects of the law, but the moral aspect still stands. That putting something that's like just blatant sexuality out there would still, technically be sinful. It's like lust is a thing that exists naturally, but it gets taken care of within marriage. I think anything other than that, both would be considered immoral, but then also, as we talked about earlier, have societal consequences.
This is totally off topic, but can I ask you, do you like Paradise Lost?
I actually haven't read Paradise Lost yet.
It's a really there's an audiobook version that's read by, I can't remember, it's Emperor Palpatine as Satan.
Okay.
It's really good.
Oh, I'd like to listen to that. I have to write that
awesome.
down.
I can't believe I never encountered it in college. It sucks.
Yeah, I think honestly, like, I think it's kind of a slow read. If you it's like one of those things where you do have to be forced to read it in a lecture hall. But when you turn on that audiobook, man, you really get the epic poetry portion of it.
It's not in the curriculum anymore, then?
No, I mean, it is. I know other people who've had to read it, but I just never encountered a class with it. Is it the type of thing that, like, you'll have to read it with some kind of supplementary notes, or is it able to you can understand?
No, I don't think so. I think, it's like you're kind of gonna open with it's Bible fan fiction, basically, is the only way I can describe it. It's a form of Bible fan fiction where really after a certain point he's basically rewriting Genesis in epic poetry format in English. So you might not like it from that perspective, because I know that certain types of Christians, definitely kind of frown upon that. But that being said, I think it has some really interesting points being made about what you were just kind of saying specifically, because later in the book, during the Adam and Eve portion of it, once Eve has fallen and she seduces Adam into also falling, there's like an explicit portion of it where basically their love relationship becomes lust based for the first time, and they experience that portion of human sin. So it's very interesting, and you might also enjoy the audiobook and just turning it on while you clean or hang out or whatever. It's a
Yeah, I think that's actually
okay. So it's an audio drama with BBC. It's like Ian McDermott plays Satan in it. He doesn't read the whole thing.
You know
right?
what she said actually right there just kind of helped me formulate my theological argument against Gregor, because she is right. That's kind of like, you know, if you think about it, the fall is when everything kind of got corrupted, and that's obviously, like, you know, that's the first time they put clothes on because they're ashamed, and you know, it would fall into play that, you know, if they'd had or were going to have like sexual relations before the fall. I mean, you can only really speculate about that, I guess. Which, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad either way. I'm just saying I don't know, but that just kind of shows you that's where the negative aspect, or the objectively negative aspect of lust, is not that it's like negative in itself, but when viewed post fall, it kind of is. And like the curses, like for instance, the curse that's put on Adam, or I don't know if you would call it curse or whatnot, but whatever. Okay, God says Adam from that point on will be working and providing for his family, and Eve will be in childbearing, and her, I guess her hopes or whatever for her husband. It kind of shows like that's how we're getting back to, you know, an image that's better for us and somewhat corresponds to pre-fall, although of course it's still going to be fallen, even if, you know, it's got to be in faith to be a good thing, a truly good work. But if you take that and then you add like the aspects in the law about sensuality and how I guess harlotry and whatnot, usually back in Old Testament Israel, was punishable by death and stuff. And then you look at, like, say, Jezebel, or the character. Well, she was a real person, but they called her Jezebel kind of like or figuratively, so we don't know what her actually name was. But when it was talking about one of the 7 churches in Revelations, talking about someone, they called her Jezebel, but we don't know her actual name. It seemed to be implying that there was something kind of wonky going on at one of the churches that needed to be reprimanded, dealing with some kind of sensuality and lust, and that it was ultimately harming the people of that congregation, because you know, as it's always said, like, you know, free now, but you have to like accept repentance. So you're repenting from sins and not like continually staying in them just because they're forgiven. And I think that's kind of where my argument against Christian erotica would come from. It's like, it's still going to produce something negative when the goal would be to be, you know, making things better.
I mean, it's going to produce children.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. I think that's where, as a marital aid, it becomes, you know, part of the dictate and be fruitful and multiply. And I think to go back to the issue of the fall, I think one of the points that's kind of made in Paradise Lost is that they had sex prior to the fall, but it only became corrupted by lust afterwards. And so then the real question is it possible to depict in literature in a way that stimulates committed readers a form of erotic or sensual experience that is not corrupted by lust, either for the reader or the characters? And that's a very interesting challenge that I think I might be tempted to take on, actually.
I would say no, just because we are fallen, though. Like, if we're talking about it strictly as a marital aid, it's like, how would that really be enforced? Like, would it only be sold to people who are married? And then once they use it, like, it would have to not be in the hands of like anyone else. Like I really
Well,
think
yeah, I mean, you would be basically talking about kind of a form of a sacred book that would be presumably, sold through, I don't know, this is just all spitballing, but like it would be cool if a very cool, down to earth preacher, not like the televangelist in Elaine, Ben, if a cool, down to earth preacher was like, I'm going to start a publishing company of these marital aid books, but you got to be a member of my church, married, and like provably
And your wife
in
has to,
need of
help me out with the.
no. But I think that in a perfect world where all members of a church could be trusted, maybe it would be possible to depict these things in a lust-free way that could then be used in a lust-free environment to positive benefit, not just to strengthen the intimacy of a committed couple, but also to, like Gregor said, produce children.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about is getting into like two extremes, though, because I think we can both agree that the Catholic stances on certain things, which we were talking about earlier with, celibate priests, and then that possibly leading to pedophiles and whatnot is bad.
Sorry, I missed that conversation.
Yeah, but I think the middle ground is, and this is where I'm again going to shill for my Lutherans, is that
Shilling for the
Luther.
Lutherans.
Yep, that's what
Catholic
I do.
light.
Luther was the first. I mean, he married a nun, and he was a monk, so they both broke their vows of celibacy. But they did it almost, I'm not going to say in defiance, but in showing that these, mandates of, pastoral celibacy, like that, it's pretty much anti-scriptural, and it falls back right into that one.
Right, and seems anti-human as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing about the I can't remember if it said these were specifically the doctrines of demons, but in the latter times or whatever, people wouldn't be given into marriage and would forbid certain foods. I mean, it does seem to line up there.
Yeah, I think that the reason why the Catholic Church specifically is so very anti clergy marrying is largely due to the Catholic Church always having had, due to its origin in Rome, a very antagonistic relationship to goddess worship, which relies heavily on elements of sacred prostitution, transgender priests. You see that a lot in Mesopotamian and Sumerian goddess religions. And I think
that's so ironic, because then they turn around and start venerating Mary when like PVM, I think, has no scriptural basis.
I think that, the Virgin Mary is a very interesting subject because I think she is a way of kind of funneling interest in goddess worship and the goddess archetype into essentially a safe but still very powerful form. And, I think Mary is an important psychological figure. I really appreciate the work of Carl Jung and the respectful way he kind of provides us with a codex of like aligning the symbolism of existing Christian doctrine to more modern ideas in some ways. And I think that, when she is viewed in the light of this goddess tradition, especially when she's paired with Mary Magdalene, and you get what is traditionally called the Madonna whore complex, what we're really seeing are two sides of the same kind of feminine divine energy that is also sort of, that kind of also relates us back to the fall, as it were. To me, that event really represents the development of consciousness, both personal and in humanity as a whole. And I think that when we develop consciousness, we become self-conscious and we become aware of things like taboo and right and wrong, morals and ethics and suffering and death. and work. And those are all things where if we were just animals, we would engage in those tasks naturally and we wouldn't think about it, and it would just be fine. Animals don't toil by the sweat of their brow. They live as nature tells them. But we do because we are aware and we are conscious. So to me, from an historical perspective, I think that Adam and the symbol of Adam Kadmon in
Come
Kabbalah
on.
and things like that.
Somebody's eating. Can you at least mute your mic?
I think that by and large, this symbol is really representative of the historical development. I mean, somebody had to be the first person who looked around and realized he was surrounded by a bunch of monkeys. So I think that, as time has gone on, we've seen more and more people develop that level of consciousness that permits this kind of awareness of others. But at the same time, that comes at the terrible cost of really seeing others, which again ties back into transgressive fiction. And I think is really why people are driven to write transgressive fiction, is because they feel that really painful tension of the drive to beauty and to goodness and to higher states of being and consciousness, and then they see how difficult it is when not everyone is on the same page. And I
would disagree. I would think that when Jung gets into a lot of that stuff, and it's kind of ironic because a lot of the wait, did something happen?
What are you disagreeing with?
What do you mean did something happen? What?
All of a sudden there was like no background noise at all.
Oh, but what are you disagreeing with?
Well, the thing about Jung is there's like two. Now I'm hearing myself.
Okay, mute.
Huh?
Oh, okay, go ahead. I don't know.
It's like, well, okay.
It's better. It's better. Whatever happened, it's better.
Yeah, it's not doing it now.
Go ahead.
The thing about Jung is like there's two things. One is that it's ironic because if you study a lot of the theosophical and pagan type, I guess you would say mystery religion, which I don't advise anyone to, but it's kind of interesting because that's their whole system is always built around these symbols that talk about some kind of, I would say, a counterfeit system where rationality is kind of explained and the power is always given to the humans. It's like you, as opposed to like being submissive to what's actually the truth. And the other thing is that, a lot of people are interested in how we have this kind of like built-in inherent knowledge, but then they'll try to use certain archetypes or really just, Jungian language that is kind of already explained in the Bible when the Apostle Paul is talking actually about the Greeks and their writings. And he talks about how we all, since we are like in the image of God, we have these things kind of built into us. We're not, I think it was worded, the law is written on our heart. So we have like an automatic, we know right from wrong, but then that was the purpose of the law of Moses, which is to show us kind of how we fall short and just how, I guess you would say, rigid it is and how there's no way we could do it and would need, need a savior. I think that, where was I going with this?
I don't know. What were you disagreeing with, though? That's what I don't understand.
Oh, yeah. With the fall as being like representative of developing consciousness, I think that's a way definitely to look at it because we did become, aware of things. But it also doesn't say that, before the fall, we were completely animalistic. I mean, I don't think there's
no. I don't think we were completely animalistic, but I think it's possible to be unconscious and be. I think when I'm saying more animal, like, can we really say the guy who stumbled upon fire for the first time was conscious? We don't really know. We would have to be there, but like, did he have the self-awareness to put on clothes and develop taboos and things like that. The real question is, like, to me, okay, so are you familiar with the circuit model of the eighth circuit model of consciousness that's put forth by I believe it was Timothy Leary, and Robert Anton Wilson expanded on it pretty significantly in his book Prometheus Rising, where he talks about how you can kind of format the consciousness of the human brain into 8 stages of awareness, and how the first kind of base level of conscious awareness is sort of like the baby kind of consciousness where we're bonding. It's kind of, he proposes, where basically the oral fixation comes from, and it's associated with kind of softness, the mother, closeness to the mother. And then the second level of consciousness, which I think is where I'm kind of talking about we were at this time, was more primitive, more based on issues of dominance and submission, kind of the consciousness of like a toddler a little bit more, and more concerned with its position in the pack and less concerned about these other things. And then the third level of consciousness is kind of an emphasis on sexuality. So I think that's a little bit more toward developing a goddess culture, kind of a primitive goddess culture that's still derived from the information of these first 3 circuits. But then you hit the 4th circuit, which deals a lot with things like taboos. And then after that, the circuits 5 through 8, Leary kind of proposes those are more like abstract gradation circuits, where it's like the higher you go, the more you're like completely on like outer space, philosophical, not even, just totally concerned with more spiritual issues. So those are typically the kinds of circuits that are being inhabited by priests and so forth. But I think when I'm talking about the development of consciousness and what was before it, I think what I'm talking about is the evolution from the 3rd circuit to the 4th circuit. When we got that 4th circuit online and we started to develop the cultural idea of what you're talking about, these taboos, these very early laws, Hammurabi's code, but well before that, the laws, written in our hearts. So I think it's definitely that I think is really what is being talked about with the fall and with all of these things. Really, it's
so you're saying you don't really take the Bible literally, so you're not really a believer per se.
I'm a believer, but I think that the Bible is a spiritual metaphor. This is the problem between Catholics and, Protestants and fundamentalists too, is that it's, I definitely believe in the Bible and I believe in the spiritual lessons of the Bible. And I think that the Bible is largely influenced by historical events and people. But I think overall, I think that it is more of a spiritual handbook than it is a physical or an historical one. So I think it's really, it's really largely about the development of consciousness and the relationship of consciousness to God, and how it's a really powerful gift from God that is the source of all human will and drive and energy and thought and being and emotion. And it's this glorious.
Well, if you're going down that road, if you're saying that that's a Catholic versus Protestant thing, I would just have to point you back to the early church father, like, definitely predating Rome, or the Roman Catholic Church, Saint Irenaeus, whose book on heresy or heresies pretty much deals exactly with what you're talking about, with the development of Gnosticism. That even Paul was fiercely battling in the in the Bible. I forgot which one. Basically, it is where he talked about what certain heresies would arise, and then that basically does all fall under just the kind of umbrella of I guess big G Gnosticism. But it's not. That's really not like what you're describing. Isn't really traditional Catholic or even Orthodox.
Oh, no, it's not. It's definitely not.
Not to be mean, but that is.
No. You're totally right. you are totally right to make the distinguishing, nature. I think, I was raised in the Catholic Church. I don't really identify as a Catholic much anymore, but in my experience, and at the time I was a Catholic, I definitely, had the impression that Catholics were not necessarily Bible literalists in the way that a lot of Protestant faiths tend to be. And I think, to me, that's really the distinguishing factor between the two, is that most Catholics I know take the Bible as more of a spiritual metaphor. But I do agree with you that, obviously Gnosticism is one of the projected heresies, and it's something the early church really fought against very hard. And I think really the main reason for that is because of its depiction of the demiurge and this very evil depiction of God, which is very, it's certainly psychologically difficult to deal with.
Well, I
And
mean,
it
it's just
sends
straight up
ultimately the
biblical.
wrong.
Well, it's straight up basically what is talked about when, I forgot who the writer was, or I can't remember if it was actually Jesus speaking or if it was one of the apostles. But when they said, the main thing that the devil and ultimately the Antichrist would do is A, be the father of lies, and B, try to exalt itself above God, which is exactly what this, the whole thing about the demiurge and all that does. I mean, that's, if you look through that whole philosophy, all of Madame Blavatsky and all that, that's basically all they do. They try to basically say that the devil was connected to a higher being. And, that's the thing that's always, it's been funny to me is that, a lot of people, when they talk about Gnosticism or they talk about, the Freemason stuff, they will make fun of a lot of Christians for saying, thinking that they're the boogeyman when they're really just talking about something. And they will always use that term spiritual. But if you boil it down, it is the, that exact thing of trying to exalt the devil above God, which is straight up, what's talked about in the Bible.
I definitely totally 100% agree with you and see what you're saying. I think ultimately, though, I think you can experience these philosophies in a godly way and in a pure way, and you can understand that consciousness is a gift from God and that all inventions of the human mind and consciousness are ultimately necessary. And things like the circuit model of consciousness don't necessarily, I think, clash with the Bible, but I think they enhance our understanding of it, and it really becomes a very personal text. And I think when you read the Bible in this way, it becomes it's very much about your personal relationship with Christ and how Christ is a part of all of our hearts, especially once we save them, or once we save ourselves through him, but also too for righteous pagans who we carry in our hearts and think of day to day. And I think that I really think that the problem is the idea that all forms of this interpretation are forms of Gnosticism, because that's where you get into trouble. I think that if you ignore these early, because you also have to consider the source. I mean, early Gnostics were part of the Catholic contingent of people who were still, as far as I recall, they were living still under Roman subjugation. And it must have seemed so horrible and so terrible. And they had just seen, or their forefathers had seen this man who had been crucified and had been sent here by God to be crucified as God's son. And I think that must have been probably a very alarming thought for some of them. And I don't think the early consciousness under Roman subjugation, where people were being fed the lions and crucified like Christ, I think that it must have been impossible for them to really reconcile this with any kind of loving God image. And so they created Gnosticism to compensate. But obviously, I think the Catholic Church couldn't abide that. So they definitely, they could have been, maybe a little bit more compassionate, I think, toward these people who were obviously very scared. But I think also, at the same time, now we're 2,000 years from that. We have seen a lot of different forms of developments of understanding in both science of the body and science of the mind. I think it's also important that we explore the science of consciousness. And I think ultimately, acknowledging that consciousness, like everything else, is a creation of the Lord. I think that's a very powerful thing, and it changes the way we read the Bible, yes, but I don't think it makes it clash. I think if anything, it becomes apparent how the Bible can really, it means Protestant law and Catholic law, and it contains echoes of everything else that came before it and comes after it. And I think that's why it remains, it is like the handbook of consciousness, truly. So I don't know. Sorry to go on and on and on, but it's just a really interesting subject.
Yeah, why you got to be a rules lawyer?
I
Zach, I mean, you give your rules lawyering, right? Is what you're doing all the time.
I would just say that kind of elevates, consciousness to a level that it's not really at. It's like we're
but
still.
It's the soul. Do you believe in a soul?
Well, yeah, obviously, but as far as consciousness, like that just seems like going back and trying to
But why do you want to? I guess my question is, why do you want to argue with somebody who says that they're a fellow Christian and they just have a very
this stoicism, this self-induced stoicism at the age of 24? It's just unnecessary, man.
Well, it's not stoicism, but
I think it is. Yeah.
No, I mean that's a little bit different. It's like a practical philosophy related to something else. But anyways, it just seems as if this individual Regina says, I believe in God, I believe in Christ, I read the Bible this way, and you want to say, oh well, you're kind of doing it wrong because I read it this way. I mean, this seems like
that's what I've been saying.
I mean, it just seems to me as if like in this particular era, in this particular time, in this particular year, it seems as if folks who are Christians should be like banding together, not arguing about splitting hairs, right?
Seems like you should be splitting hairs. But when we're talking about something like such as Gnosticism and using modern developments of science and consciousness to read the Bible in a certain way, I think that opens up a can of worms that ultimately does lead us back to the original Gnostic.
I mean, I thought one of the main tenets of Christianity was truth, right? So I mean, finding what the truth is, right? So you could find the truth by it, you find the truth by asking questions, right? Picking up ideas and exploring them, right? So this idea that you
can't worms, you sound just like a snake.
What's that?
That was just a joke. I said, speaking of cans of worms, don't you sound just like a snake?
Who, me?
I'm not insulting you. That was just a really lame joke about the Garden of Eden. And
okay. Well, maybe I am a snake by saying that idea, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, but I will tell you this: if I am doing it wrong, Zach will tell me.
Hey, thanks for coming, Ann. We've been kind of wondering, rooting for you, but kind of wondering, everything's all right. You doing good?
I kind of just woke up, actually. I didn't mean to sleep this late, but I traveled all week, making history as probably, I'm going to bet, the first person to ever work for Countercurrents and Disney in the same week.
Wait, for what now?
What?
Oh, you worked for Countercurrents?
And Disney. I mean, there are plenty of people who have worked for Countercurrents and there are plenty of people who have worked for Disney, but not both in the same week.
What's Countercurrent?
It's like a freaking awesome small press publisher that does more pretty far alt-right stuff.
Okay.
They're a lot of their readership doesn't. I've written for them before. I stopped because a lot of their readership really doesn't like me because they think I'm a Jew and they're kind of, the proverbial men who see Jews in their sandwiches.
I mean, are you a Jew? I mean, seriously, I don't
everyone
know.
thinks I look like one, but I haven't sent my spit to any ancestry companies because I'm too paranoid. But I was raised Catholic. That's all I know about the subject.
Okay,
Oh, that's probably
you're likely not a
worse.
Jew then.
Catholics.
Okay, I mean, there's not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just curious. Okay, all right.
Well, I'm just saying that because what Countercurrents is known for by the reading public in sort of an aghast manner is, you know, they talk about taboo subjects that are usually on the right, and you know they're just naughty. But as a writer,
Right.
ironically, I'm really not. I mean, I'm not putting down their readership. I just disagree with a lot of the wavelengths a lot of them are on. But
Right.
as a writer, Countercurrents has turned out to be the one publication that will basically publish just about anything, even if they disagree with it,
Right.
as long as they think the quality of the writing is good enough, which is probably the best editorial policy of any publication I know of, even though, you know, their reputation is just people screech and faint.
Right.
But they're one of the only publications I know that will publish authors that they or their readership may or may not agree with just because they find them interesting and well written.
Okay, so what was the Disney gig? I'm sorry, I just.
Oh, but the way it fits into, you know, what comes into everyone's mind when I say I'm writing for Countercurrents, the way it fits into what pops into everyone's mind is hilarious, because the gig for Disney, which required a lot of traveling but paid really well per minute of actual work, because I had to get a COVID test, but I got paid quite well just to go and take the COVID test. But I was an extra in a show called Snowfall for Disney. I mean, I don't watch kids networks, and Disney is still mostly a kids network. But from what I understand of the show, it's a very, very woke show about young Black people in Compton in the 80s. I think, like, the way they were dressing people, the scenes was kind of 70s and kind of 80s.
What was the Snowfall title about? I mean, crack?
I guess you'd have to watch the show to know that. I mean, yeah, because it's set in LA, but it's Snowfall? I don't know. But anyway, I was hired to pay what I think they call a white heel character, which means I stood, you know, with my arms folded literally behind a young Black boy who had been accused of something. I don't know if it was supposed to be rightly or wrongly, but I was just supposed to be standing there, like, staring at him like Miss Anne.
Mean mugging.
Yeah, I'm mean
to get
mugging.
that gig. I mean, are you an actress?
No. It's just really, really low skilled, like, acting adjacent jobs like that are pretty much the best paying low skilled labor in California. So if you're smart and you live here, if you're smart, you wouldn't be living here, so never mind. Anyway, I've had a long week. I had to travel for that job on 2 separate days, and then I traveled the day after Thanksgiving, so I'm not breaking any federal or state laws, to go see my family in Arizona. So,
we're in
By
Arizona.
the way, Anne, I from what I understand, the governor's curfew and mandate and all that shit, aren't sheriffs like refusing to enforce it, especially
in a lot of places,
for holidays?
it's kind of a patchwork, kind of like our electoral system. I'm not sure where it's being enforced or why or how. All I know is that there are enough people who belong to protected classes that no one's going to pester over laws anyway, unless they're in France. Enough of those protected classes of people ride public transit, like the Flixbus, which I took to Arizona, that they're not really going to crack down on that, because they're going to wind up with like another George Floyd at some point if they really try to crack down on those areas of travel. So from what I've heard, they're more likely, I forget which community it was, But there are supposedly patrols out to see how many cars were parked around people's houses on Thanksgiving.
That is madness. That's
Yeah.
like stalking behavior. I don't care what justification you use. By the way, so to kind of bring it back, I don't know if Right the Hand is going to show up or not. I sent him the link a while ago, but I don't know. He may have forgotten about us. But
That'd be
okay.
cool if he does.
Huh?
That'd be cool if he does.
Yeah. But I mean, if he doesn't, we've got enough people here that to do our own thing, and we'll probably go maybe another 30 to 45 minutes. But Gregor, you may have to leave before that. Completely up to you. I know that you had something tentative.
Yeah, I mean, I should leave now, so let me go ahead and do that since you brought it up. But
I'm not forcing you out. I mean, but you did.
No, I really should have left at 10, to be frank. So
I'm sorry, man.
But I got excited about these.
We got invested
topics.
in
I got the yeah.
Yeah, I guess
And
before you go,
you just had to wait to do the traditional "I need to leave now that Anne's here" move.
No. What were you going to say, Zach?
I guess since you were tangentially part of the conversation, I'll just bring up 2 points so we can drop the heavy stuff and move on to fun stuff. When you were talking about the Bible interpretation, I would just say, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but it's that method of interpretation would imply that God, not being completely literalist, would imply that God is a liar, which of course I couldn't submit to. But then also, it seems like what you're saying when you talk about consciousness in a way being a gift, which of course we don't know exactly what it was like pre-fall, like we can just speculate. But it seems like you're really
think of consciousness as a gift. I'm sorry.
Well, it just seems like that's getting really close to saying that you believe the fall was actually a good thing and that the Satan serpent would have actually given us a gift. Is that correct or no?
I didn't say that. Regina may have.
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting way to bring the argument back around. I think that it's complicated. It's like I said, it's horrible and it's painful to be aware of these transgressive things. That's why I called transgressive fiction an emotional genre. And I really find it very emotional to write and very hard. But at the same time, without this gift of consciousness, we wouldn't be able to be fully aware of our experience of things like love and etc. So we would not be aware of the grace of God and the grace of our pre-fall state. And by falling and admitting we have fallen, we are also then able to enjoy the bounty of God's forgiveness and God's eternal ability to forgive that is so beyond the comprehension of mortal man. All we have to do is be the prodigal son and truly in our hearts and come back and say, Father, I am sorry, and we will be forgiven. And
we will be forgiven,
that's the mystery.
We will be put back, and I mean, I don't want to say put back, but we're definitely going to be put back to even better than pre-fall. So I mean, you really did say, because I mean, anything that you're saying that we gain from the fall, which I mean, of course, I would say we gain nothing. I mean, it was literally the first sin that introduced death, dying, and everything bad into the world.
Oh, but we're not supposed to fear or get bothered about death. Technically, I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, that's
look at this little face. Look at this little face. Would you want to curse this adorable little unconscious?
What a cute little cat.
Would you want to do that to him? No.
Yeah, I mean, don't to be scared because we have faith and we'll be redeemed, basically. But that's the thing, we're getting redeemed. There was nothing good that came about from that original fall. It seems like you're almost saying like you're siding with the snake.
Well,
she is. She's siding with Satan. She wrote that nun fuck book. I mean, what do you?
I might be a little bit of a Satanist in a way, but I think that Satanism it really.
All right, I'm leaving, Bob.
Okay, Gregor, that's what.
Yeah, Gregor, thank you. Good night. I think that Satanism ultimately should lead you back to God. I think that actually is a little bit of the point of the original Judaist interpretation of Satan as
That would
being
make a
God's
good
accuser.
that would make a good novel in itself. You should
I've,
write that and explore it if you really do believe that.
I have already
I
written
have
it.
nothing further to debate. Like I proved you proved my
Dude,
point for me.
well, why do you want to debate?
It's not
hard
debate.
by.
I think I think really the point that is being made by Satan when he is offering the apple of consciousness to Eve is that it is you know he I ultimately you know Satan dragging them down to hell or dragging anyone down to hell and giving anyone the opportunity to fall is really it like I said, it is in a way a gift because it's the only way we can experience redemption and experience the relief of redemption. And there's no other way to fully experience God's love without the art and act of redemption that is, unparalleled from Him. And I think
I would just say,
definitely,
look at the angels who didn't fall. They love God and they're super happy in heaven. We're the
yeah,
ones
but
in
they
a
don't get
fallen
to be
state.
aware of anything and they don't get to also experience free will. And that's
Well,
really the
we don't
key. I guess the
necessarily
question is
experience
whether
free
you
will, though.
I don't think
well,
Zach
but
believes in free will. That's another thing
I
Well,
think
I believe in the bondage of the will.
That's
yeah.
fucked up, man.
Yes,
That's
that's
something
a
you got to
good way
work
to
out.
describe it. That's a perfect way to describe the
Bondage of the will. That's
intersection.
fucked up, man. I don't
I
know how
love
you
that.
rejoice in bondage of the will.
I mean,
I don't even consider that to be godly. I don't
no, that's
apply that.
completely biblical because
I
it's
don't.
It
saying
is.
Well, no,
for
no, but you're a Lutheran and I'm a Baptist, so I don't accept your interpretation of the Bible. Though it's the thing, I accept you as a human being, But I mean, I'm not going to be swayed to your, arguments on these things,
I mean,
because like I said,
the
I'm
thing is, I mean, I
Baptist.
don't expect you to be swayed to like the more complex stuff about the will, but Lutherans and Baptists are going to be in agreement on basic topics. I mean, so you and I are basically in the same religion. We just have slightly different
Oh, the way you
theology.
talk, man. Sometimes it sounds like an alien religion. What you're talking about, dude. I
Well,
mean,
no, the bondage is actually simple. It's that, you know, it's basically why we need a savior in the sense that we left to our own devices,
Yes.
we're gonna be sinful. We're in a fallen state, and so when we get forgiven, because that's the whole thing about the law. The Pharisees thought that by keeping the law they could attain perfect righteousness, but really inside spiritually they were corrupt. They were proud. They were all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. And so that's the thing about being born again. Also in baptism, God is literally helping us out and making, fashioning our will so that, we're literally, doing his work.
I, I,
That's the whole point of it.
I just want to intervene and say I don't know for sure, but I think Ben may be snoring. So,
No, I'm
and
not.
okay, do you want to interject anything? I can hear your thoughts to some degree, but
I don't have any thoughts. You're reading something else. Probably a
okay,
dead person that's floating in your home somewhere.
okay.